All right, guys, we want to welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our preview and prediction for the 2025 LSU Tigers college football team. Looking at the staff, Brian Kelly, 29-11 mark through 3 seasons. Second year in the role for offensive coordinator Joe Sloan, and Blake Baker, second year on staff as DC for him as well. And it's been a great offseason for LSU. So far, they have the top-ranked portal class, and they also hauled in a top 10 cycle from the high school ranks. 2024 results. They lost 3 in a row mid-season that caused them to stumble to 9-4. And of course, we want to offer our condolences to the Lacey family following the tragic death of Kyron Lacey, a superstar receiver for them in last year's team. Looking at the LSU offense for 2025, Nick, you only see they return 4 starters, right? But this team has a lot of talent top to bottom to work with. It has a lot of people pegging him as the top offense in college football heading into 2025. It's going to start with Garrett Nussmeier. This is a guy who had a lot of hype coming into last season, and I'd say for the most part he lived up to that hype. Obviously had a heavy load to lift. He threw the ball 40 times per contest, resulting in over 4,000 yards. This is a player that throws with some legit heat, a big-time arm, great ball placement, has a gunslinger-like mentality. I think he navigates the pocket well. Arm doesn't waver on the run, can throw too many lofting balls downfield, though, instead of firing on a fine line. His vision can be poor. At times, he seems to get lazy mentally when diagnosing coverage, and he forces things that are not there, leading to his interceptions. That's a bit of a problem last year. He had 12 of those. Nussmeier, though, he's at the top of the Heisman list, Nick, and I think he's going to be a finalist come December. A Joe Burrow-type season is what people are expecting from him. Obviously, those are crazy numbers that are almost unrealistic, but when we talk about these weapons, it's going to be more and more likely that can be an accomplishment for him.
Darius Nussmeier is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He ranked, highly on our list, 1 and 2 between him and Cade Klubnik, and that's for a very good reason. Nussmeier is a phenomenal quarterback that is stepping in his second year as a starter and has the opportunity to develop and turn into a similar quarterback that we saw with Joe Burrow or Jaden Daniels. I saw somebody posting on social media saying that, hey, look, Nussmeier had a better season than Daniels or Burrow did in their first season starting, and I think that's something that is fascinating. I looked at the stats. Burrow's first season as a full-time starter, he had 2,800 yards passing and 16 touchdowns. Daniels had 2,900 yards passing and 17 touchdowns. And when you look at what he was able to do last year, significantly better in terms of yards, 4,000 yards that is, and 29 touchdowns, a huge leap there. Granted, he threw the ball a lot more than either of the previous 2 quarterbacks did during those seasons. The only time that the number wasn't even close to that was when Burrow threw for 527 attempts in his Heisman winning campaign, but obviously that was a crazy year that I don't think Nussmeier will be able to repeat that. But the biggest concern for me, and I think this is something you have to keep an eye on, is the interceptions. When you look at the stats, Daniels had 3 interceptions in his junior campaign, that is, and then Burrow had 5 in his junior campaign at LSU. Nussmeier had 12 last year. That's a big number, right? That's a startling number. That's something you have to keep an eye on. Some of those interceptions were very untimely. I look at the game against Alabama. Those are some bad interceptions in that one that cost the Tigers in a game that was really a do or die for their season. Had some mistakes against Florida as well. The 12 interceptions is certainly a problem, but outside of that, it's hard to find problems with this young quarterback who is just a talented young man. The accuracy, was good at times last year. 64% comp rate, 4,000 yards obviously is an incredible number. Jarring when you look at it on the screen. Hard to fathom that it could be much worse than that this year. He could certainly push that 4,500, even 5,000 yards maybe this year if things all go right. They're going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to really rip the ball downfield over and over again, which I think is a key part of this offense, is just finding ways to hit downfield. They're going to target the tight ends as well in this system. I think Nussmeier can have a phenomenal season. I would not be surprised at all if he goes out and wins the Heisman. He really should be the favorite in my opinion. I think should be the favorite over Arch Manning or Klubnik at this moment in time, just because the system around him, I think, sets him up well, and those weapons that you were talking about that we'll talk about in a second there could be really solid. The sky is the limit for this quarterback. I think the season will kind of land somewhere between Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, Heisman winning seasons, probably closer to Daniels and closer to Burrow. But is that going to be enough to win a Heisman, considering this is a class that does have some talented pieces? Is this going to be enough to get this team over the hump and finally in the playoffs? I think Nussmeier really has a big role to play in this offense and a lot of success in this team.
The Texas A&M game was also a brutal second half for him as well in terms of turnovers. You look at just the embarrassment of riches they have at pass catcher, 2 phenomenal additions in the portal. Nick Anderson, he was a walking big play, averaging 21 yards per catch and 10 touchdowns 2 years ago because he didn't play last fall due to injuries for Oklahoma. Had 3 scores on 3 receptions versus Tulsa in his freshman campaign, for example. Generated great depth on his routes, was good at just blowing by defenders out wide, great suddenness off the line of scrimmage, a nice long strider at 6'4", 208. He's going to be a elite ball player. Barryon Brown, Great second gear / acceleration. He has elite speed, makes the most of opportunities on tunnel screens. He's a lethal return man. 15 drops in 3 years, though, and he's never really been that great of a route runner, so it's a bit of a project player, but he's going to get involved in some capacity. Aaron Anderson, he was a phenomenal addition from Alabama as he came back home. Ended up being the leading receiver, 884 yards and 5 touchdowns. This guy's dynamic out of the slot with great foot speed, has sharp cuts. I think he's going to continue to progress as a route runner as well. You look at the rest of this group, it doesn't stop there. Xavier Thomas, he's a bit of a Swiss Army knife for him, brings lots of speed to the table. Hope to see more usage from him, though, in 2025. Chris Hilton battled health all year, but he went bananas the last 2 games of the year. They have a 4-star Kyle Parker entering his 3rd year. Tight end room is also incredibly deep. Bauer Sharp was the leading pass catcher for Oklahoma last year, showcasing nice athletic ability and physicality. Did struggle as a blocker, though. Trey'Dez Green, he was playing basketball, so he was seldomly used during the year, but he went off in the bowl game. Real athletic, big body with speed. He looked absolutely scary versus Baylor, Nick. They also got an ex-4-star in Donovan DeGreen, who didn't play for Texas A&M last year. This is a phenomenal receiving group. And what you saw in the bowl game, Nick, I think is just a start to what they can accomplish. Because, again, Green, who's a true freshman, when I was watching him, I was like, how do you guard this guy? I mean, his size, along with the athletic ability, especially if he's going to probably focus on football more this year at 6'7", 245, this kid's going to be unreal. And I think him and Chris Hilton, who were quiet for the most part of last year, are going to be some of the unsung heroes in this group.
Speaking about Garrett Nussmeier, I mentioned the tight end room being a key part of this offense. I think the wide receiver room is obviously a really key thing for here, but the tight ends, you got to talk about these 2 tight ends. Trey'Dez Green was really solid for this team when he played for them last year. The numbers with him were really good in the bowl game. This is a kid that I think can really step up and be involved. If anyone out there is a big CFB video game head like Dalton and myself are, I used him in my one of my dynasty saves at LSU, and he's been an absolute machine for me, putting up so many points and big touchdowns. He's really going to be physical and strong in real life. I think he's a guy that could really step up this year. 100 yards receiving for him and 4 touchdowns on limited touches. Expect a big year out of him. Bauer Sharp was really good last year as a receiving tight end for Oklahoma, 325 and 2 scores for him. Got to work on the blocking, but I think that's something you can certainly polish out. And speaking of Oklahoma, when you talk about Nick Anderson, people forget how good that 2023 was at times. 10 total touchdowns for him. Had a good bowl game against Arizona in the loss with 75 yards receiving and a touchdown in that one. Also had a great game in a win over UCF, 105 yards and 2 scores in that game. Really good numbers there. I think Anderson will be a big key player for this team. Brandon Brown was a solid add. I don't think he's going to really light the world of light down at LSU, but it's still a guy that's really got some good experience in the SEC. 361, 3 touchdowns for him this past season at Kentucky. A guy that I think you can certainly rely on to be a key contributor at times in your offense. Aaron Anderson was super impressive, 885, 14.5, and 5 scores for him. Last year, really good numbers there. Xavier Thomas had 218 yards receiving and 2 scores, good numbers. And Chris Hilton was also solid for this team with 243 and 3 scores in 9 games. So this is a deep room here. A lot of talented pieces that could be involved in this offense. I love what these weapons can do. And Nussmeier, he's a good quarterback. He's going to get the ball, spread out the wealth here. It's going to be tough to cover all these guys on defense.
Now we look at the running back room. Last fall, we figured this would be a big weak spot for LSU, and I'd say it certainly still is. They only averaged 109 rushing yards in conference play. Caden Durham, though, he was a breakout player. He was an unsung hero of his own during the season, showcased hard running, good long speed. He was a frequent asset as a pass catcher. Pretty powerful guy with good angles to make defenders miss at the second level. Caleb Jackson's a 235-pounder, likely to take over the number 2 role, at least early on. Very limited action last season. Didn't see the field at all in the second half. He could potentially be a short yardage back, but Durham, with his physicality, is probably going to occupy that role as well. They have a high-ranked recruit in Harlem Berry. Should see lots of time on field early in his career. Great in open space, has foot quickness, a really creative player as well. Prototypical all-purpose back that they could certainly still benefit from having. This is still a room that lacks depth, good talent, so they should be fine here, bearing poor health, but worst case, they have athletes at wide receiver who could move down, Nick, like Xavier Thomas and Barryon Brown potentially, if need be. I think the running back room is better than it was last year, but I don't know if the run game as itself is really going to explode this year, quite frankly.
I do think there's some concerns with the running game, but I love Caden Durham. I'm going to sing his praises all year, and I was singing his praises last year. I think this back is really the real deal. He broke onto the scene as a true freshman and really showed that he can be a top back in the SEC. I think he'll continue to grow and have a phenomenal season. I think 1,000 yards rushing is certainly in the cards for him this year. 750 last year, 5.4 and 6 scores, about 62 yards per game. I think he's a phenomenal back, right? He had 2 receiving touchdowns as well. I love what he can do. A very versatile back. The speed on him is solid. The field vision is good, and he will only get better as time goes on. I'm a huge believer in him. I think he'd be one of the best backs in the SEC by the time this season is done. I like Caleb Jackson as well as a solid number 2 back at 150 yards last year. Nothing crazy. And then I think Harlan Berry will get some reps early on. There's no shame in plugging in running backs early who are inexperienced. Give Berry some reps to see what he can do.
And you look at the offensive line coming into 2024. I thought he was clearly the best offensive line in college football, and they certainly played like that for the most part, despite the aforementioned run game being poor. It's a complete revamp, though. They replaced 4 starters. Tyree Adams, 6'7", 314, wasn't all that impressive in his playing time last year, but a third-year ex-4-star recruit. It'll be interesting to see what they do on the interior line. DJ Chester, the lone returning starter, as a first-year starter. He was an ex-5-star last fall. He was solid for them. Added an exceptional 2-year starter in Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech. He spent 2023 at left guard, so I'm going to slot him in there. And then Josh Thompson is 6'5", 301. He was an elite right guard for Northwestern, also a 2-year starter. They really like what they have in Weston Davis. He was a top 150 recruit in last year's class at 6'6", 310. He's in a battle of high-ranked 4-star Carius Kearney, who is 6'5", 335. Regardless, this is a team that will step up front one way or another. I think they're going to be fine. They have an interchangeable interior offensive line. I think they're going to be experimental, and if they struggle, and I think week 1 going on the road to Clemson could be a bit of an issue. But Nick, this is an area that we're not really talking about enough, I think, is this offensive line that does replace a lot of players. We're just incredibly hyped on Nussmeier and his weapons and the flashiness and that, but the offensive line might be a legitimate concern that could pull them back from being an A+.
Certainly, if you want to see a reason why this team will not go far and make the college football playoffs, it's because the offensive line may let them down. They do replace a lot of good players, including a top 5 pick that ended up going to the NFL draft. So I think it's certainly something you have to maybe be slightly concerned at as an LSU fan, but I think they know what they're doing. Brian Kelly knows how to coach in the trenches, and they've brought in some talented pieces. I think Tyree Adams is probably your biggest concern point at left tackle. He did not really look phenomenal last year. You might be a little worried about that. Braylon Moore was a good add out of the portal. Going to play him at left guard most likely, but can he jump up to the level of competition? Might have to keep an eye on that. I trust DJ Chester. I thought he was really solid last year. Expect him to be good at center there. I think he's a really solid player. Josh Thompson, is he going to be strong at right tackle? I think you want to keep an eye on that. Weston Davis, I think he's going to be really good at right tackle as well. I think he's going to continue to grow. I think him and Chester are the 2 guys I feel the best about. The 2 transfer adds or the pieces further down the depth chart, and Adams are the 3 pieces on this offensive line that do worry me a little bit. I want to keep an eye on certainly left tackle, how that develops throughout the season, but I do trust the coaching there that they'll be able to make this work. If you're looking for a liability in a tough spot there, probably going to be the offensive line, but I think these are guys that they can figure it out and put it together as the season goes on.
Final verdict from me, what more could you want from an offense? A veteran QB who's destined to have a Heisman-type campaign with all the depth he has to throw to. More importantly, that depth is full of speed and skill, and this offense will be tough to guard. Only things to worry about is the running back depth and who will occupy that right tackle position. Other than that, I think you're looking at the top offense in college football, Nick.
Yeah, this is a phenomenal offense, right? This is an offense that disappointed at times last year. 30.5 points per game is probably below where they wanted to be. They were 7th in pass yards per game and 25th in yards per game overall. The running game kind of brought down their total yards per game. They'll be a top 10 offense in passing, certainly. They need to get the scoring a little bit up, right? 30.5 points per game is probably a little bit too low. Got to find a way to balance the rushing attack, but this is a phenomenal offense with a potential Heisman winner, slinging the ball for you. I really like what they have at wide receiver. This is going to be a fun, high-flying offense to watch this season.
Now moving to the defensive side of the ball, this was a quality unit, better than it's been the past couple of seasons. But it certainly wasn't up to par where they would like it to be. And part of that 2019 team, they had an elite offense. They also had a very good defense as well. They had numerous players go to the NFL. And you're going to have a better unit in 2025 to reach those goals. They landed, to 9 players in the portal now, 2 top 55 recruits. So I think they're bringing in a lot of talent in this revamp. Only returning 4 starters, but I think depth across the board is going to be very impressive. And you'll start with the defensive line. Jack Pyburn, he was a good run defender for UF this past season. Showed good physical frame at 265 pounds. Jamari Butler from Nebraska has been a respectable producer in his career. A good player at 265 pounds as well. Gabriel Railford, a 4-star in last year's class, played about 150 snaps. And, of course, you have Patrick Payton, who I absolutely love this guy. He was elite for FSU 2 years ago. A little bit more quieter this past year. They also only won 2 games, though, so that's kind of expected. He was explosive off the edge, though. A guy with top-tier athletic ability. Good at getting his hands up versus the pass. I think he had 10 pass breakups 2 years ago. Needs to develop better use of length, inside moves. in his motor checkout, does a good job of pushing into the backfield versus the run. I absolutely love this player in Patrick Payton, Nick. And since FSU was so bad last year, people forgot how good this guy is. I think he's going to be a top 10 edge rusher in CFB in 2025. And LSU, that is going to be glad that they got him.
Yeah, they're certainly glad they grabbed him. This is a kid that's so talented. Had a bit of a down season last year, but still was able to put up 5 sacks and one forced fumble plus 3 pass breakups on the defensive line there, 31 total tackles. 2023, he had a really dominant season, which coincided with Florida State having a really dominant season as well. 43 total tackles for him, 9 pass breakups, 7 sacks, 2 forced fumbles in that campaign. 2024, when he was first full-time starting campaign as well, he was pretty efficient in that season, 35 total tackles plus 4 sacks in that season. So this is a guy that's been productive throughout all of his campaigns as a full-time starter, more than 30 tackles and multiple sacks, at least 4 sacks in every season. You expect probably 5 to 10 sacks this year for him. Really good numbers there, a guy that you can absolutely rely on when you need to. I think he's a very talented piece coming off your edge there. They added in a really good in-conference ad in Jack Pyburn. I think that's a really surprising ad for them. 60 total tackles for him, a sack and a forced fumble last year, plus a pick. This is a guy that's very much a menace on the defensive line that will find a way to put pressure and really have a solid season there. I think Gabriel Reliford could be a guy, maybe get some rotational reps. He had 10 tackles last year, plus a tackle for loss. Want to see what he can do potentially. But I like what this edge group can do. It's a very strong unit that's got 2 really good guys they added from the state of Florida.
Now you look at the interior defensive line. Coming into last year, it wasn't all that high on this group, and I think they were manageable throughout the year. We're going to have to see them still up their play as a group. They want to, accomplish lofty goals in this conference. Dominic McKinley, he was a 5-star in last year's cycle, should certainly assume a large role. Great strength and short area quickness. Ahmad Brock's a 3-star in last year's class at 6'3", 285. They have a veteran coming back in Jacobian Gilroy, 6'2", 320, has been a quality run stopper in his time. Did miss last year of injury, though. Shown Washington, a near 300-pounder. Was not much of a factor last fall. They did pick up a big body at 6'6", 350 in Sadir Mitchell. Hasn't been on field much for Texas. This is a guy that has strength and power, though. They recently just picked up Bernard Gooden from USF, who was an elite run stopper for the Bulls, despite only being 6'1", 268. This is a good group here. Much more confident on the interior than I was last preseason, Nick. I think the edge group is going to be phenomenal. They're going to be elite. But what do you make of this interior D-line? Is this enough to get the job done?
It's a weaker unit for sure, and I'm a little concerned about it. Ahmad Brox, I think, is a solid player. 17 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss. He's got to have a big season. Dominic McKinley, he's got to break out and really be that star that they hope he can be. 7 total tackles for him last year, 3 sacks. He's got to find a way to be very productive this year, though. They got to get a ton out of him. I'm keeping my eye on him. I think he's a player you really want to watch here. I think Jacobian Gilroy, maybe he will step up and be involved. Zion Williams, a freshman that they're bringing in, will hopefully have some success early on. Maybe he could play and get some reps in here. Definitely a weak and young part of this defense, so I'm certainly worried about the interior. Curious to see how that's going to go throughout the season.
I move to the middle of this defense, another group that I'm really excited about. You have a guy in Whit Weeks who was terrific for this football team, coming off a big leg injury, though. He was an impressive defender altogether. He was a liability in coverage, certainly doesn't show the greatest athletic ability, moving sideline to sideline. But he's a hard-nosed football player, great tackler, stout versus the run. If this defense can rally and play with some range and they can force him back inside, then Whit Weeks is going to be the guy that cleans things up at 6'2", 228. The linebacking unit alongside him, Harold Perkins. What is he going to do? He's expected to play that star position that allows him to play linebacker and safety. I'm assuming something kind of like what Barrett Carter's been doing for Clemson the past couple of years. He's an interchangeable player who has elite traits. Nick can come off the edge, and he can even play in a defensive back type role, I guess, if they wanted to in the slot. West Weeks likely doesn't factor much into the lineup as he's barely played in his career. Devon Keys really balled out the last 2 games of the year. Tylen Singleton, Charles Ross, highly rated recruits who are talented players who are waiting in the wings. I'd say this is a good room overall. I'm certainly curious to see what's going to happen with Harold Perkins, though, at the end of the day, and I'm hoping Whit Weeks will be at full strength come September.
I think it's a good room, but it has some liabilities. Whit Weeks, the top tackler for this team last year, that returns 125 total tackles for him, 10 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. Do-it-all guy. He has to be really strong for this team. The coverage is a bit of a concern, but overall, I think this is a guy that's still a really big leader for your team. Expect him to lead the team in tackles again this year. Harold Perkins is a star player, but obviously the injuries last year were a bit of a concern, right? only played in 4 games, 17 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss for him. Want to see what he can do in this full season of workload. Can he be up to full speed to play the entire year? West Weeks, a bit of a more backup guy, 15 total tackles for him last year in rotational roles in 5 games. Maybe he'll get involved a little bit, play some games here and there. Devon Keys was solid as a younger player. Is he going to step up and be involved? I'm not super concerned about this unit. I think this unit still has a ton of talent that will be able to find a way to get the job done. Definitely keep an eye on it, though. If the defense starts to struggle, you're probably going to point to the linebackers as being the reason why.
125 tackles, 10 TFL for them. And I certainly want to harp on a point, Nick, where we talked about this numerous times last year. We expected them to get blown out by Alabama because we said Jalen Milroe was going to kill them toward the boundary. That's exactly what he did. And the same thing happened against South Carolina, where that's just been a struggle-some point for them, especially against dual-threat quarterbacks, is, they've not defended the run well to the edge. And that's a big area of concern that they need to clean up. And that's where we talk about kind of a bit of a lack of athletic ability at linebacker. And I think with having a great defensive coordinator in Blake Baker, they're going to figure that out. But it's the most glaring, pressing need on this defense that we pointed out perfectly last year.
And it certainly is a liability when you look at the matchups they have this upcoming season. Cade Klubnik, he can move. He's an agile quarterback. Certainly wouldn't label him as a dual threat, but that kid can run. That might be an early test they face in this season that could pose some issues for them. They got to play Lenora Sellers again this season. That could certainly be a problem for them. He's a quarterback that you certainly know can run. I look at Taylon Green as well as Arkansas, maybe a little bit less than Lenora Sellers, but he's another quarterback that can make some moves on the ground and really give you headaches. Those are 3 teams that I'd certainly look at, maybe potentially DJ Lagway as well in the Florida game. So there are 3 to 4 games on the schedule you can look at and say, hey, these are quarterbacks that can move and they're mobile. It could be a problem for this linebacking core that seems to have struggled against those quarterbacks in the past.
John Mateer and Marcel Reed are also in that schedule, and Pavia can hurt you with your legs as well. I know that's pretty much the entire schedule at this point, Nick, but that's a concern that we think that they need to improve on, and I think they certainly will. Looking at the secondary, I think they did a pretty good job this offseason picking up great playmakers in the portal. Looking at people they returned, though, Ashton Stamps. He was battle-tested last fall as a starting corner. I think he really is going to grow into a good football player. He showcased good awareness and ball skills. He had 14 pass breakups at the end of the year. Mansour Delane from Virginia Tech, after 3 years of him also showcasing good football IQ, physicality, and ball production, he's going to come over to be a starting corner for the Tigers. A lot of people think that incoming 5-star DJ Pickett is going to get on the field at some point due to the lack of depth. He has great length and speed. PJ Woodland played a solid amount. Didn't do much, but did get on the field as a true freshman. That's encouraging. Picked up Jakeem Jackson from Florida, who saw limited action in his 2 years. CB room, I'd say, significantly better in terms of shape than it was a year ago. It's still not the greatest of rooms, though, Nick. But I think DJ Pickett, as long as everyone's healthy, he's going to be able to play a nice role as a number 2 corner in rotation. What do you make of this corner group?
I like Stamps a lot here. I think Stamps is a really good player for this team. 51 total tackles, 14 pass breakups last year. Got to see if he can get a pick this year. Had no interceptions. Maybe that's something he's going to want to target this year. Try to find a way to get that stat on the stat sheet. I think PJ Woodland's a good player, but still needs to show me a little bit more. 20 total tackles for him. Had 3 pass breakups as well. Want to see a little bit more out of him. This is a younger room that's got some interesting pieces that could potentially be big assets as the season goes on. I certainly want to see what DJ Pickett could do. I think he'd be really solid. And then you listed off some ads there at corner that could be really solid for this team as well. I'm keeping an eye on that. Pickett, maybe a big player that could potentially get some reps later in the season.
I think an underrated addition is Tamarcus Cooley, coming off a phenomenal season for NC State, working out of the slot. He was a valuable run defender, playing near the line of scrimmage a lot, made great plays on the ball as well, so I think that's a player that's going to make a lot of headwinds this upcoming season. The safety group, I think, is a bit of an iffy area as well. They returned Jordan Gilbert, who was a starter but struggled a great deal. Deshaun Spears was a high-ranked recruit, struggled in coverage himself in his debut season. He was great against the run. Austin Osbury hasn't really played in his 2 years of college football. Neither did Joel Rogers last fall. So this was certainly a group that was in flux before the ad about 2 weeks ago. Nick and A.J. Halsey from Houston, elite in coverage for the Cougars. He had 5 interceptions, was phenomenal against the run as well. I think that he might be the saving grace for the safety group, who, as a couple weeks ago, was certainly iffy.
Yeah, A.J. Halsey was an incredible ad that really bulks up this safety room that puts them in a great spot here. I think he's a really talented player that's had a good couple of seasons at New Mexico in 2022 at 86 total tackles and 2 picks. In 2023, he had 97 total tackles, 3 pass breakups, and then this past season, 2024, he had 74 total tackles, 7 pass breakups, 5 picks. He was an absolutely a menace. He had 2 interceptions in 1.5 in one of those games this season, so he is just an absolute menace. He's a great player at 6'2", 215. Slot him in there. He's a menace. I think he's going to be really good for this team. A great ad late in the portal cycle there from Brian Kelly, showing his muscle on the recruiting trail. I think Gilbert's a player that you can kind of rely on at times. A decent enough player. Was fourth on the team in tackles last year with 55 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups. Deshaun Spears was okay at times, 24 total tackles and a pass breakup for him. Want to see what he can do this year as well. They have some other pieces, rotating in and out there, but I think this is going to be a huge year from this player they added from Houston who could just be really dominant for this team.
Look at the defensive verdict. This side of the ball is the big focal point here, and it's ultimately going to determine how far the Tigers go. They've struggled versus the run due to the lack of athleticism in the middle of its defense and limited D-line depth. This team has good players and are stronger in all areas, and that includes the cornerback position and the interior, Nick. So this is a group that will improve. The front seven has to be much more consistent to make the playoff. Certainly think the pass rush will be a tough one to contain them on a weekly basis. I give this one a pretty high grade of, let's see, what do I got here? This is going to be a B-plus unit right now, Nick. It can get up into the A's, I think, because I really do believe that pass rush is destined to really take over, and if Harold Perkins thrives in his role, then they can really dominate opponents. I'll go with more of a modest B-plus at the moment.
I think the front seven has to be consistent. That's the biggest thing for this team, and can that secondary hold up to the expectations that they have right now? They have the pieces together. They added some good pieces, but can they put the puzzle fully together here? This is a good defense. This was a defense that at times was a bit of a problem last year, certainly against some of those running quarterbacks that we just rattled off there. You want to keep an eye on that. I think the South Carolina game is one you want to keep an eye on with Lenora Sellers, but I think the coaching is good. I trust this team in the trenches. Just have to find that reliability in the trenches for this team to be a full contender in the SEC.
Final prediction in the schedule for LSU. The Tigers are going to get plenty of love heading into 2025 as the offense is flat out stacked. On paper, with a veteran QB at the helm and a defense that should surge big time in Blake Baker's second year. Showcasing consistent cohesion is such a worrisome bet to make, though, and will likely be the reason why they failed to deliver. Big fan of the upside for this team. I think Kelly will finally put it together, Nick, leading to some big results. A 10-2 mark for me at Clemson. I think most people are picking that as a loss for them, about 2.5-point underdogs here in the middle of May at Ole Miss. The Rebels have really been giving them challenges the past couple years, so I think that's one that can, it's kind of underrated that I think they're going to lose. I do have them going on the road and beating Alabama, though, so maybe you can replace those. I know that's what you did, Nick, with them losing to Bama, but beating Ole Miss. But if they go on the road week one and beat Clemson, which a lot of people aren't expecting them to do, this team is going to be set up for glory, Nick. I do have this team in the college football playoff.
It's hard for me to pick them to beat Clemson week one. Brian Kelly has not coached very well in week one games during his tenure. Previously those were on Sunday nights, which I think is kind of a bit different, but he's lost his, opening games during his tenure at LSU. Just has not had any success really with this team in those opening games. So I think that's something you want to keep an eye on. Potentially they lost to Florida State 2 years in a row, then they lost last year to USC. They're playing another marquee game to open up the season here. This time, a full road game, not a neutral site game, and that makes it even harder for LSU. I think Clemson's just a very good team. It's tough to outwit Dabo at home, unless you get really lucky, I think. So I just don't trust Brian Kelly in that matchup. I am going to take Clemson right now, and I feel pretty confident about that going into August at this moment in time. I do think Alabama will win that matchup at home. I think Alabama plays really well in Tuscaloosa against LSU. I know they lost the 2 games of the century, but outside of that, they have a pretty strong record against LSU in the past, 15 years or so. So I trust Alabama in that matchup there. I think it's a good opportunity for them. I do think Kiffin has Brian Kelly's number a little bit. He's beaten them the past 2 seasons, including some impressive results to get that stuff done, but I think this is a guy they lost last season. LSU beat Ole Miss, but they did put that game into overtime. They previously beat LSU down in Oxford the last time these two teams played in Oxford, so I think it's something you want to keep an eye on potentially. That could be a game where you maybe lose that one. Overall, though, I think the schedule is mostly cut and dry. Maybe you want to keep an eye on the game against Oklahoma later in the season, depending on how the chips fall in that one. Keep an eye on the game against South Carolina, and then maybe Vanderbilt because of the quarterback situation, but I just think Vanderbilt won't be as good as a team this year. I like the offense a lot here. They'll put up a ton of points this year. Look for a lot of points against some of those weaker teams. The defense should be strong. If the linebacking core is playing good football, this team will ride the wave into the college football playoff and really cool down Brian Kelly's seat. Some of the pressure will certainly start to build if this team misses the playoffs again this year. This roster, there's no excuses in my opinion. This is a great team with great coaching. They should find themselves into the college football playoff, and then from there, all bets are off. A great team with a great quarterback leading the way.
And I think this team at 9-3, Nick, would still get into the playoffs as long as those are high-level losses and it's not like a Arkansas or a Vanderbilt or something like that. I think if it's some combination of what we have on screen with Ole Miss, Clemson, Alabama, and whatnot, I think 9-3 would be good enough to get them into the playoff. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I think the schedule is that tough.
Yeah, totally on board with you there. I think that makes a ton of sense. If they are 9-3 with the losses at Clemson, at Ole Miss, and at Alabama, it's gonna be hard for the committee to punish them considering the strength of the schedule. If you start throwing in losses against, at home against Florida or maybe at home against South Carolina, that could be really a tricky sticking point for the committee. We saw last year that some three losses teams had some issues when it came down to the wire based off the strength of those losses. I'm talking about Alabama, who had some tough losses that really kind of outweighed the big wins here. I think those are three, forgivable losses from the committee, if you want to use that word. Props to LSU for scheduling a marquee ACC opponent, the best team in the ACC and the best team in what I consider the Tier 2 conferences, the ACC and the Big 12, heading Death Valley in Clemson. That should be a phenomenal matchup. Instant classic game potential there.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.